Welcome to The Explainer. So, have you ever caught yourself wondering why some people, maybe even you, constantly bite their nails, rearrange the same items over and over, or tell stories that just sound way too exaggerated? A lot of the time, we just write these things off, right? We call them quirky personality traits, or maybe just harmless bad habits. But today, we're actually reframing 10 of these weird behaviors based on our source material. We're going to look at the fascinating and honestly sometimes heartbreaking ways the human brain operates, showing how these everyday actions are actually profound cries for help from the mind.
Okay, let's dive right into this. Think about it for a second. Have you ever gone back to check a locked door or maybe the stove, even though deep down you knew you already checked it? It's completely relatable, right? Most of us do it. But what happens when you have to do that 100 times a day? Well, that is the absolutely crucial difference we're exploring today. We're looking at the stark contrast between harmless everyday habits and overwhelming mental compulsions that literally take over a person's life.
To make sense of these 10 distinct behaviors, we've structured this explainer into 4 cohesive psychological themes. First, we'll look at the illusion of control, then fear and social disconnect, next, extremes of emotion, and finally, understanding over judgment.
All right, let's jump right into our first theme, the illusion of control, when the brain seeks safety. So in this first category, we're exploring behaviors that look like simple bad habits on the surface, but are actually desperate, invisible attempts to manage severe anxiety. First up is what the source material calls the skin picker. These are known as body-focused repetitive behaviors, basically compulsive urges to pick skin, pull hair, or bite nails. To most people, this just looks like a quirky habit. But put someone in a high-pressure environment, think finals week or a massive project deadline, and suddenly this isn't just an occasional nervous tick. It becomes a constant, helpless state. It's really a warped way of coping where a person might spend an hour in front of the mirror and their hands are operating like they literally have a mind of their own.
And this creates an absolutely brutal, vicious cycle. It starts with an overwhelming urge or stress, which forces the physical action. Step 2 brings a brief, momentary relief, kind of like finally scratching a relentless itch. But then Step 3 hits, pain and visible scarring. And finally, Step 4 crashes down like a ton of bricks, a massive wave of guilt and frustration. The really tragic part here is that the mind watches helplessly from the sidelines while the body essentially takes over the steering wheel, trapping the person in a loop that, ironically, just creates even more stress.
Now, what's really interesting about this is how it connects to our second behavior, the ritual checker. The outside perception is just a stark contrast to the inside reality. On the outside, people see neatness, right? Or perfectionism. Maybe it's someone aligning every single pen on their desk at the exact same angle, or having to tap a light switch exactly 4 times before leaving a room. But the inside reality? They are frantically silencing an overwhelming fear. These rituals aren't about order at all. They're like an invisible electric fence of anxiety. If the ritual isn't performed perfectly, their inner alarm system just screams at them, convincing them something terrible is going to happen.
This perfectly sets up our third behavior, the trapped collector, or what we commonly call hoarding. The source gives us this powerful quote, "A fortress against fear that becomes a prison." People who hoard are often just trying to calm unbearable anxiety after a major loss or trauma. A stack of old junk mail or broken electronics starts to feel essential, almost sacred. Holding on to these items is a desperate attempt to control their world, creating a fortress of safety. But eventually, the clutter piles up to the ceiling, harming their physical health and totally straining relationships. That safety net? It turns into a chaotic prison. Moving on to Section 2, Fear and Social Disconnect, the invisible walls. Here, we're looking at behaviors that profoundly isolate individuals by completely warping their perception of relationships. Let's look at the silent avoider. The outside world usually labels this person as antisocial, picky, or just shy. The colleague always dodging group projects or sitting completely alone in the corner at a party. But the inside reality is a deep, overwhelming fear of judgment and rejection. It's an avoidant personality trait. It's really not that they dislike people. They actually desperately want closeness. But the terrifying trap of fear, fueled by constantly imagining everyone is judging them, well, it makes them choose the safety of loneliness over the risk of pain. Next up is the shadow chaser, someone who is locked in a state of paranoid thinking. Imagine a state of hypervigilance, where the brain acts like an overzealous personal bodyguard. But here's the catch. This guard is completely broken. It sees literally every person as a threat. Trust becomes practically impossible. Daily life turns into an exhausting battlefield, where a casual smile from a barista looks like mockery, and an innocent comment from a friend feels like a calculated, direct insult. They hold intense grudges because their brain genuinely tells them those grudges are absolutely justified for survival.
Now, a crucial point from the material is how modern life acts as pure gasoline on this fire. Modern technology heavily amplifies this social fear. Think about it. A simple seen but not replied text message or a random social media unfollow can send the shadow chasers spiraling into days of anxiety, interpreting it as absolute proof of betrayal. And this exact same digital environment, this endless, exhausting chase for likes and validation, perfectly fuels the dopamine addiction of our next behavior, the story spinner.
The story spinner is someone who engages in pathological lying. The fascinating neurological truth here is that the reward isn't actually what they get from the lie. The brain literally gets addicted to the dopamine released by telling the lie itself. It's an internal chemical rush. So what starts as a little stretch of the truth about a weekend trip becomes this massive, ever-expanding web of fabricated achievements and drama. And over time, as you can imagine, these lies destroy reputations and completely isolate the liar from real, authentic human connection.
Let's transition into our third bucket now: extremes of emotion, numbness, and overdrive.
We're going to explore how the brain's emotional volume knob can either be muted all the way down to zero or cranked up to dangerously unnatural highs. Let's look at the emotional brick wall and the emotional void. Again, we see this massive gap between perception and reality. Outside, this looks like stoic strength under intense pressure, or maybe incredible confidence when facing harsh criticism. But inside, it's emotional blunting. The volume knob for feelings has been turned all the way down. This isn't true resilience, guys. It is a total inability to process joy, sadness, or fear.
Just imagine watching a fireworks show but only seeing gray sparks, or hearing your absolute favorite song but with the volume dialed down to near zero. That is exactly what life feels like with emotional blunting. It's essentially a defense mechanism often linked with depression or past trauma. But sadly, it leaves family members feeling unloved and partners feeling completely ignored, simply because they misinterpret this involuntary numbness as cold indifference.
And this connects directly to a condition called alexithymia, which is a profound difficulty in identifying or describing emotions. The really tragic part is that those with alexithymia often don't even realize they're disconnected. It feels completely normal to them. They're constantly fumbling for words, trying to navigate high-stakes emotional moments without any internal compass. It is literally like trying to play a complex board game without knowing any of the rules, which inevitably leaves their loved ones feeling completely shut out and confused.
Now let's flip that extreme to the other side, the endless party. On the outside, modern society praises this behavior as peak charisma, boundless energy, and just sheer ambition. They're the life of the party, talking fast, pitching 10 brilliant business ideas all at once. But the inside reality is a dangerous hypomanic state. The brain's joy circuit is literally stuck on overdrive. It's an unnatural, totally unsustainable high that leads to reckless spending and heavily damaged relationships, all before the inevitable, devastating crash hits them like a bursting balloon.
And that brings us to the human cannonball. This is a manifestation of impulse control disorder, where compulsion is cleverly disguised as freedom. It's quitting a job with absolutely no backup plan, or booking a one-way international flight on a total whim. The brain's brakes simply stop working. In our modern world of instant dopamine hits and frictionless one-click shopping, this disorder is incredibly common and highly destructive. The brain shouts, "Do it now," and the person obeys before reason can even step into the room, often leading to massive financial and personal fallout.
Which brings us to Section 4, Understanding Overjudgment, the mind's cry for help.
We've looked at 10 very distinct behaviors today. And here's the absolute most important takeaway of this entire explainer. These aren't just quirks, bad habits, or character flaws. They are profound signals that your brain is desperately asking for care and attention. If you recognize these behaviors in yourself or someone you love, it does not mean you are broken. It simply emphasizes the need to seek professional help and to replace societal stigma with genuine empathy and understanding.
So let's wrap up with a final thought. Which of these hidden cries for help felt most familiar to you? And what will you look at differently tomorrow? The human mind is incredibly complex, and sometimes its ways of protecting us look a whole lot like self-sabotage. Thank you so much for joining me on this journey through the source material. Keep learning, keep seeking to understand, and we'll see you on the next explainer.